Welcome back, listeners, to That's a Good Card. Today, Ya will have the challenge of getting me to say, that's a good card. While Ya will be doing the convincing, I'll be playing the devil's advocate. If you're interested in more Tag C content, check out our Patreon in the link down below. Also, now's a good time to remind you to hit that subscribe button if you're listening to us on YouTube, and please leave a comment below with your thoughts on today's topic, as well as suggestions for our next card. All right, Ya, let's get started. What card did you bring to us today?
This time around, I scoured the spiciest list to find this one, and I want to give a special thanks to John over at Things in the Ice for this 11th hour recommendation. Turns out that they had the same kind of wavelength that I did. So the card that I'm bringing today is Amphibian Downpour. It's 2 generic, 1 blue pip. It's an enchantment aura that says Flash, Storm, Enchant Creature. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a blue frog creature with base power and toughness 1/1. Yeah, pretty straightforward enchantment aura. Not one that we have brought before. And so a little bit about this card. It does show up only on CEDH analytics in about 55 cards.
55 decks.
55 decks, thanks. It made a top 4 at CEDH 8 in a Marchesa deck of all things. And it made a top 4. Which I thought was so hot, and that I had to kind of bring this up. I had never seen this card make them. I don't even think I've seen it make the top 16, much less the top 4. And then to be in a Marchesa list, I thought was way too cool. So I really wanted to kind of talk about it. It's been on my radar, and here's our chance.
Yeah. And I was actually at that tournament, and this is something that's actually seen in the Pacific Northwest meta a good amount. I've played against this card quite a few times. Yeah. There's a couple of mono blue players that were running it. Like, I've definitely gotten hit with a Storm Count 6 Amphibian Downpour on my Corvold before. So this is something that seems to me like a staple, but the more I talk to people and the more I kind of scour lists, the more I realize that this is kind of like a Pacific Northwest special, where everyone's aware of this up here and are kind of privy to it, but we don't see it in a lot of the other spaces, or if we do, it's in very small amounts.
Do you think it's because it's so Pacific Northwest themed? Downpour, Pacific Northwest?
Yeah.
I think so.
We just love the rain up here.
As a person who used to live in Portland, which got similar amounts of rain, that wasn't lost on me.
That's actually really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just drawn to anything that has to do with rain here, you know, Into the Flood Maw. Those are also a banger card,
All right, Kyle, you ready to go over why I think this card deserves to be in the main 99?
Yeah, I'm super excited. Let's hear it.
All right, the first point that I'm going to bring up is Storm. This card can go crazy. It is going to, like you just mentioned, really hit potentially many things. Being in blue, you're going to learn to kind of be good at timing things. And this is one of those cards that's going to really kind of teach you to hopefully be a little bit patient, kind of know when to interact and know that, okay, you can kind of come in pick your moment, right? Like, this is very much one of those cards where you want to almost try to wait for Magic Christmas Dreamland, right? Before you slap this thing down. Maybe even using some other counter magic to kind of bait out more spells to get thrown onto the stack. Like, this is just one of those cards that can really change the state of the game.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And the interesting thing about it, too, is when that storm count does get higher, it gets more and more difficult for you to react to it, right? Something that a lot of people don't realize, or at least I've experienced anecdotally in pods where this card is played, is people don't realize that you can just point multiple copies of the same thing.
Yep.
So if the storm counts 4, so even if you have a counter spell for one of them, right, it doesn't matter. If there's 3 Amphibian Downpours pointed at your thing, it's like this just gonna all go on the same thing. So I've seen its Magic Christmas Dreamland firsthand and seen Amphibian Downpours for like 6, and it's definitely spicy. So I don't really have an issue with the ceiling of this card, and I think that, the first point just being, hey, when the storm count gets real high, this card becomes like an unstoppable force. I agree with that. So that is definitely, I'm already thinking that might be, in the front running for your strongest point. So Storm is pretty freaking broken, let me tell you.
Well, that kind of goes right into the second point, and these were almost kind of tied, but this card is pretty decent at face value. And so we got to talk about the flash part, right? Which is this is my second point, right? One of your favorite things to kind of always talk about is that now we've got an enchantment aura, right, that has flash. Well, so it's a great gotcha, right? It's a really great gotcha. And this kind of ties into the first part, but like part of the reason it's so cool is like you're already in blue, so it's not uncommon at all for you to potentially just be that person that's going to be draw pass, right? Like you're holding up interaction, you're kind of waiting it out because you want to try to control the game, and it's going to put people in.
It's a little bit of a generalization, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of blue decks that are turbo. But yeah, I kind of get what you're saying.
I think that's more of a kind of reminder to myself, right? Because I am more of like trying to just jam out cards and then realize like way too late into the next person's turn, like, nope, I should have held up for interaction.
It's kind of also like the all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares.
Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. I had to really think about that. But I need to go back to geometry. But what I'm trying to say is like the draw pass decks that exist probably are in blue, but not all decks that are in blue, you can't assume that they're draw pass. You know what I mean?
Correct.
It goes one way, but it doesn't go the other way.
Yep. But yeah, like I said, this having flash does have just a great gotcha. It's probably, again, because it's so rare, because it's only being seen in 55 decks, chances are, unless you're in the Pacific Northwest or you've got that one player who does bring the spice, like players are not gonna expect this, right? They're not gonna expect, okay, cool, everything's settling down, we're gonna go back to the original spell on the stack, right? Like this, like Underworld Breach, and now, or that's a bad example. Like something's about to stick, and
sure,
instead,
Seedborn Muse on the stack. Yeah,
right. You're going to make everything a 1/1 frog, right? Because
I guess my example's also bad too.
Yeah,
Seedborn Muse on the stack, and then you cast the Amphibian Downpour. Maybe not. You gotta wait till that shit resolves and then cast it. But you know what I mean.
Things resolve.
You know what I mean.
Because now we're going to go into my third point, right? This is removal that sticks in a really good way. It's not just like hitting somebody with a Path of Exile on their commander, right? That they can recast. This is going to, your commander is now, that your opponent's commander, right? That Corvold, that Najila, the Sisse is now a 1/1 frog, right?
Yeah.
With no abilities. Now they have to be able to sack it, or they have to swing it and go into their second main before they can bring their commander back.
And don't forget Kinnan in this. I think that Kinnan might be the deck that has the most trouble dealing with this card. And the reason is because a lot of those other decks that you mentioned are in black, right? So you can just play an Orcish Bowmaster, ping your own guy down, and then recast your commander.
Right.
Like, that's something that I have anecdotally seen a lot. So I think Kinnan really actually struggles against this card specifically because in Simic, you don't really have a lot of ways to kill your own dude or deal one damage to your own dude. So I think that is actually the deck that might struggle with this the most, which is really funny. Right after we released a video 2 weeks ago with Containment Priest about bashing Kinnan, I think that this is also a Kinnan killer.
I mean, I played a bunch of Kinnan against a few Kinnans this weekend, and they are a menace. They are definitely still a menace. They're strong again.
They always were strong, but they were kind of like outshone by Nadu while Nadu was legal. But this weekend at MagicCon, I played against Tyler from Play to Win in 2 separate games and got absolutely walloped by Tyler both times on Kinnan. One of the games, Tyler had 2 Wandering Archaics and a Seedborn Muse. And then the other game, Tyler had 2 Void Winnowers. So those were some games, let me tell you.
I had the same experience, but with Higher. Higher had 2
good Kinnan pilots
archaics,
for sure.
You're like, oh my gosh, this is like, miserable.
Oh, not again. Yeah. But yeah, I think that your point about it sticking is a really powerful aspect of this card. Not being able to just instantly recast your commander and utilize resources towards, basically killing your own thing so that you can replay it is just an extra hurdle that you have to overcome.
Totally agree. But yeah, I think at the face value for this card for me, it is just great removal. It's great targeted removal. If you really need one thing to go away and the storm was just 3, chances are you're really going to get this thing to stick, right? You can point all 3 copies at that Dranith or whatever it may be. It kind of really goes away. And so unless somebody plays an LQR,
Legolas's quick reflexes,
which is a good card. Unless somebody plays that, you're probably gonna get rid of whatever you're hitting. And in a Magic Christmas Dreamland scenario, you're gonna hit hopefully everybody's commanders plus a few other value pieces that they've got on board.
Yeah,
that's my positives. Let's go to the downsides. What do you think are reasons to not slot this in?
I mean, I'll get into the downsides. I will preface this by saying my initial gut reaction when you brought me this card was I thought that this card's really powerful. So at first, I started struggling with thinking about downsides for the card. But as I started getting into it and thinking about it more and more, I was able to kind of unwrap quite a few points that I think are pretty strong. So I'll start off with the low-hanging fruit, which is just the mana cost for this card. Yep. So at 2 and a blue, for a removal piece, that's a generally pretty high cost. Now, this card's kind of an interesting spot where it's kind of removal, but it also kind of acts as a weird board clear in a sense, where you can potentially be removing everything on the board, or at least effectively removing everything on the board. Sure, everybody might end up at the end of it with 3 frogs each, but that really doesn't matter in a CEDH game. Nope. Not going to be playing too many anthems to buff those frogs up and cause problems. So it's effectively a board clear in some scenarios. But in terms of the floor for this card, our general rate in CEDH is, I think, like a half a mana. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of free spot removal, right? Something like a Deadly Rollick or something like a Slaughter Pact even. And then there's a lot of 1-cost removal. We're talking the Pyroblasts, REBs for blue. We're talking Rapid Hybridization, Pongify in the same colorway as this card. We're talking about Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Rending Volley. Like every color has access to a single pip spot removal that is powerful.
Yep.
Except for maybe green. Green might not have a single pip one. That's
like fight spells, maybe?
Yeah. They do, but it's not as consistent as all the other colors.
No.
All the other colors, it's pretty powerful. But green has some really good options once you get into 2 mana cost, but at 1, you don't see a lot. But my thought process is, if you're looking for this as removal, the rate is bad. Mm-hmm. You want something that's like a 1 cost, right? And instead, you're sitting there with a 3 cost. And I know that this isn't super relevant, but in my head, it's a little bit relevant, where with the banning of Mana Crypt, we're in a place where we're not overflowing with colorless mana like we used to be. So it might be even more potent that we have removal pieces that are 1 or less cost. So the 3 cost is steep. Now, if we extrapolate that to a larger field of view, where we're thinking of this card as a board wipe instead, then it's actually on par with the other board wipe type spells, staples that we see in CEDH. Something like a Toxic Deluge or like a Fire Covenant. Mm-hmm. It's on the same plane as those, but I think the effectiveness in the colorway, I would call them comparable to a Toxic Deluge or comparable to a Fire Covenant. Especially Fire Covenant, I think like in my head, Fire Covenant and Amphibian Downpour are on similar levels. The problem is that Fire Covenant is really good in the decks that aren't running blue, whereas this card is blue. So that means that there might be better options. So if I'm putting it in the same category as a card that's fringe, even for non-blue decks, I'm hesitant if it's good enough for a deck that can run blue. And I know that that was like multiple points in the same place, but all of it kind of has to do with the mana cost and the curve of the card, like how effective the card is at rate. I think that it's just a little bit too high, even though the ceiling is super big. And normally I'm a big chase ceiling guy. I think that it's bad at rate. Like even let's look at a card that I immediately think of in Darksteel Mutation, right? That's a white card for 1 and a white. And it's a very similar effect where you target creature, turn it into an indestructible bug. And the interesting thing about that is that the bug is indestructible. Mm-hmm. So it becomes really difficult for you to remove that piece, right? So at a 2-cost rate, you're more effectively removing a singular thing than you are at a 3-cost rate for effectively the same thing. Now, that being said, there's a bit of a trade-off, right? Like I said before, you can point multiple copies of Amphibian Downpour at one thing. So if your opponent that has a really big problem piece, like a Consecrated Sphinx or Seedborn Muse, if they have counter magic, they won't be able to stop it like they might be able to stop a singular Darksteel mutation. But at the same time, if it does stick, it's not as potent. Something to think about.
Yep, for sure.
It's also kind of in that same vein as Kenrith's transformation. Is that what that card is? The one that elks, that turns it into a 3/3 elk? I think that's also a 2-cost rate.
Yes.
And it's harder to kill the 3/3 than it is a 1/1. So Darksteel Mutation and Kenrith's Transformation, I believe, is the green card. At a lower rate, do a better job of killing one particular thing. Whereas Amphibian Downpour has the upside of, even though it costs a little more and it's not as effective at killing one particular thing, it could potentially hit multiple things.
Yep, I see. Yep.
Cool. My second downside is, I guess, I don't know if I'm thinking too deep into this, but when I was musing to myself for downsides for this card, I started thinking about the times that I've played against this card and how it's, even though in the last point I just called it effectively a board wipe, it's not. And the reason why is one person with protection is potentially able to protect just their piece. And there can be scenarios where everyone else gets their shit turned into frogs, except for one person who was able to protect a very valuable piece with their own counter magic. In those circumstances, parity is lost in the game. That one person slingshots forward and becomes the big bad. They get into the driver's seat and the game is really theirs, because the person who casted Amphibian Downpour has expended 3 mana, which is a lot of resources, generally speaking, in CEDH. Let's say we're on turn 3, it's probably half their mana available. Has expended their mana to remove the board. 2 people, let's say, get their big pieces removed by Amphibian Downpour. And then the one person who's able to protect their main piece, even if it's like a Crom, they're able to protect that. Suddenly, the board state is in a weird place where that person who is able to protect their big piece, whether it's a Crom, Seedborn Muse, whatever, is now 100% in the driver's seat. And I don't really like that, because if it were a full-on board wipe, right, and 2 people don't have the interaction but one person does, and the person stops it, parity is maintained. There's no one's stuff dies. Everybody's still in the same spot. One person doesn't shoot forward compared to the other people. Yes, you can make the argument one person slightly falls behind because they have to use counter magic to stop the board wipe, but I think it can maintain a game in a draw state, specifically for a tournament space. Board wipes do a better job of maintaining a draw state than this card does, just because of the chance that someone can protect themselves while 2 other people get pushed down. And that was a really long monologue, but I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that.
I definitely hear what you're saying, but one, that's such a specific scenario that, like, yeah, 100%. It could happen, but at the same time, I think that
I've seen it happen. That's the thing.
You also don't feel too horrible because, again, in this specific scenario, that person had to use protection that they may have actually been holding up to try to protect their win. And you're assuming then, again, like with imperfect knowledge, right? You still got out more interaction pieces, right? Let's say, again, in this scenario that you're describing, right? The storm count got big enough that you hit multiple boards, right? You got it to a spot where you're like, okay, I think everybody spent everything they have. And then you cast Amphibian Downpour. You declare your targets, and then you get to bait out more interaction. And now that person, again, in your scenario, like, they're probably going to go into their turn. Hopefully, they're gonna try thinking like, okay, I'm gonna try to win. I'm gonna try to jam without protection. Hopefully, in this case.
Yeah, but in that same scenario, you can, I guess,
because if you're gonna lose, like, and again, my point is, like, if you held up for, like, whatever instead, right, like, this person was going to try to go into their turn with protection to win.
Potentially,
right? Now they're going to have to potentially go into their turn without protection and just try to jam a win.
Yeah, and I guess my point isn't necessarily that the person is going to go into their game and be able to win with whatever pieces on the board, because generally speaking, you're protecting a value engine, right? My thought process is more of they don't have to expend those resources to get a value engine going again, right? Let's say they kept that Crom. That's just going to give them, for the rest of the game, they now have tempo. They are so much further ahead than everybody else because every time that they now play another value engine or another piece, they have the tempo. They're always just going to be one step ahead of everybody else, which is where I'm a little concerned about this card backfiring. And in my anecdotal story, what ended up happening when I was playing Corvold, right, is I'm like 99% sure it was an Autumn's Veil. I veiled and kept my Corvold alive, and everybody else's stuff turns into a frog. In that scenario, I was sitting there going like, oh, I have a Corvold and everybody else has nothing. Life is good. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't remember what happened in this game. I think it was just a practice game, but I'm fairly certain the game went pretty damn well for me. Good. So being in that scenario and being able to protect, have one person protect their big piece and everybody else gets screwed over, it's a little scary. That's my second point. I know I was deep in the think tank on that one, but I hope y'all followed along with me. My third point is, I kind of touched on it a little bit, which is that the 1/1 that you're turning your thing into isn't indestructible like a Darksteel mutation. It isn't a 3/3 like Kenrith's transformation. Even though you are forcing your opponent to spend resources to kill something, it is doable. Like I said before, something that I commonly see is someone plays an Orcish Bowmaster, pings their own person, pings their own commander, or whatever, recasts it, right? It's easier to manage. It doesn't have that hard lock type feel that a Darksteel mutation has. And I think that that's what most people who see this card think of. They think, oh my god, this removal is so powerful because it sticks. They can't just recast their commander. But it's like, can they not, though?
They can,
it's a 1/1.
To your point earlier, right? Like, they've also had to spend 2 more mana on top of commander tax or whatever it is, right? And so you're like, to your point on like value sync, right? It is a pretty decent tempo play, right? To your point. But I totally see what you're saying. But like, the only thing I can think about with this point is we don't see that many Kenrith transformations or Darksteel.
No,
right?
we don't.
We don't.
Darksteel, we used to see a lot of. Back in Winota Meadow, Darksteel was nuts. But because I think Winota's used it because they were like, oh, I could just pick somebody and they can't play the game anymore. Like, that was really powerful. Maybe that was just our pod, because I know everybody in our pod used to play that card, but that card was a plague on our pod, I'd say 2 years ago. I just remember that being so damn powerful. And it's hard to know how much this card is being used in comparison to, because like you said before, it's only seen in 50-something decks, but it came out in Modern Horizons 3, so it's really new. It's kind of like Disruptor Flute when we talked about that card.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of decks running it, but at the same time, it really hasn't been out a long time. So I think the jury's still out in terms of the use case for it, but I think that's the perfect reason why we're bringing it today and why we're talking about it. But yeah, just going back to my third downside, people might think that this is stickier removal than it actually is.
Yeah, I can see that. It's not something I had thought about. Like, I totally thought to kind of like pile on to the downside here. Like, if they didn't have a good target for like a Culling the Weak earlier, like they do now, they're going to Culling the Weak and then still go slightly positive on mana by like 2.
They're like, I don't want to Culling the Weak my Tymna. My Tymna draws me cards. Oh, it's a frog? Never mind. Kill the frog.
We're killing the frog, right? Like,
never mind. Screw it.
You're stacking it to whatever it is that needs to be a flare. This becomes a blue frog, so only Flare of Denial gets a target.
Yeah,
right?
the blue flare.
It's a blue frog?
Yeah, it is a blue frog.
Yeah, blue frog. Yeah, it's a blue frog. So, I think those are really good points.
Yeah, and then my last point, my final point, is that when I look at the meta, I'm a little nervous about how effective this card is against Roxai. Look, my meta, I think the last tournament I played in, that was a 60-something person tournament, I think there were 6 Roxais that were listed. So it's not like the biggest chunk in the world, but it's something that you have to be aware of every time you sign up for a CEDH tournament. You're going to play against at least a Roxai. And this card doesn't affect Roxai whatsoever. They do not care. This does not stop them from playing Necropotence. This does not stop them from playing Ad Nauseam. This does not stop them from even playing a value piece, which most of the time their value pieces is just wheeling, right? So like the effectiveness of this card against one of the best, fastest turbo decks in the format is really low. And you might be sitting there hoping, like wishing that you had literally any other kind of interaction than this card. And, you can make the argument, well, all the other decks that run those cards that you just mentioned, Ad Naus, Necro, Thassa's, Underworld Breach, all that shit, it doesn't get affected by this at all.
No.
But at the same time, those other decks don't have an efficient way of getting to those as fast. And most of the time, when you're playing this card against those kinds of decks, you're slowing them from drawing cards, or you're slowing them from staxing the board out. So I'm a little hesitant to put something in that isn't going to be effective against the best deck in the format. That's my last point. I also have a fake point. It's not really a fake point, but my weak point is that until like Rule of Law, this card sucks. It's so bad. The storm count's never really going to be high. Yeah, so
but so is a flush
playing in a meta.
Right, so it's a flush storm, but like a flush storm is only one. It's only a 1 mana cost, so it's like a little bit different.
It's a non-point, but at the same time, I was thinking to myself, I was like, man, this card would absolutely suck if you have to play through like a High Noon or a Rule of Law, or even worse, like one of the Rule of Law bodies, like creatures, and you're like, shit, I need this Rule of Law gone. Okay, I guess I have to Amphibian Downpour this one thing. But that's my last point. Yeah, what point of mine did you think was the best point against Amphibian Downpour?
I think it's the cost. Right. For me, that's a really big...
Taking the low-hanging fruit, huh?
Yeah, it always is, right? And I think that you're not wrong, right? Like, you do have to expend more resources than potentially a person that uses a Legolas's Quick Reflexes, right? Which is only like 1 green pip, and it just kind of protects them. And so I think it is a low-hanging fruit, but it's probably one of the more effective, like, kind of dosage. If you're on Ad Naus, like, oof, you don't really like running this because that is 2 more life that you could be spending elsewhere.
Yeah, or if you're in any turbo list, really,
right,
you're not even going to be thinking about this card just because you're not going to be draw passing. You're not going to leave 3 mana up.
Yep.
That's just not going to happen.
Yep.
Cool.
How about for you? What point of mind do you think best supports why you think this card is good?
Yeah, I mean, I liked a lot of your points. I think that even though... It's always so hard whenever I'm the devil's advocate because I try so hard to push against
for sure.
some of the things that you're saying. But the fact that it has Storm, I mean, it seems so stupid to say that because it's like, no, duh, Kyle. Of course, like Storm is what makes this card really good. But I think that the ability to really pile on an insurmountable amount of removal onto one thing that really needs to stick is effective.
Yeah.
I think... being able to point 6 copies of Amphibian Downpour at a Void Winnower that really needs to die. It's an odd mana cost, by the way, so this could actually happen. Right. Now, whether or not you can get the storm count that high because nobody can cast any spells that are even, that's a different story. But I think that the effectiveness of being able to point it at something that you really, or point multiple copies at something that you really, 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 really want dead is great. Yeah. And it's like the same reason we like stuff that's like uncounterable removal, right? It's like the same reason we like Rending Volley. It's the same reason people love Abrupt Decay. When you can have a removal piece that can almost certainty, like it won't get through Mindbreak Trap, but with a good amount of certainty to kill something that you want dead, great. That's the best point.
Yep. All right, Kyle. It's time. Have you changed your mind on Amphibian Downpour? Were you convinced?
Yeah, I was. I think that this card is really powerful, honestly. It might be one of the more powerful cards that we've brought. Just the fact that it's top board, the fact that I've seen it in other top 16 lists as well. I think that this card is really effective. And it's not just going to be a mono blue card either. I think some 5-color control lists will play it. I know that Atlas has at least tested it in his 5-color control Kenrith list.
Nice.
I don't think he's still on it, but I know that if Atlas even considered testing it, I think that we're in a space where other 4-color or 3-color blue piles can consider this card. So, yeah, that's a good card.
I think that's a first. I am now 2 for 3 of my last couple suggestions in getting you to say that's a good card.
Which one did you fail?
Soot Imp.
Soot Imp? Oh, yeah, the one we recorded live. The last one. Sorry, Tony.
Jeez, I was going to bring him up. Well, you heard it here,
y'all.
folks. Well, you heard it here, folks. We got there. We got him to say it. We got him to finally say it.
We did get it. We got me to say it. You've been on a streak. I think it started with Hazel's Brewmaster, right?
Yeah.
I think it started with Hazel's Brewmaster. Now you're bringing another banger in Amphibian Downpour. It's time for me to bring the Fringe next week. I'll have to go deep into my bag and find some super Fringe.
No, don't worry.
You know it's crazy if I can get Ya to say that's a bad card, because Ya's on board with everything.
Ya is pretty happy to try anything. That is for sure.
Yeah. All right, y'all. Well, we're going to start our closing segment. That's a good card, question mark? If you haven't played with us before, what we're going to do is Ya will be providing me the name of an obscure Magic the Gathering card, and it's going to be my job, as well as you, the listener, to guess everything about that card. Type, color, cost, what it does, activated abilities, artwork, everything. A lot of you have taken to playing along with us and typing your guesses in the comments below. We absolutely love it. It really helps the YouTube algorithm.
Thank you so much.
And the videos where y'all do that, it is just incredible how much it helps our videos. Also, only about 30% of you are subscribed, so if you're listening right now, please click that subscribe button. Shameless plug. All right, yeah. Are you ready? I'm keeping that in, by the way. Are you ready to give me the card?
Yeah. I'm kind of curious whether or not you already know this card, so I'm going to just throw it out there. This card is actually kind of brought to you by Seth from Things in the Ice. Shout out to that whole crew. The card is Jester's Cap.
I know this card.
Oh, damn it. It finally happened.
I don't. No. Well, here's the thing, though. Oh, I know this card. Like, I know it exists. I can tell you the artwork to a T.
Go ahead.
So I'll start with the artwork.
Let's start it.
The artwork is like the actual Jester's cap. So it's like I think it's orange and white stripes, I want to say, with a little bit of blue.
Keep going.
And it's like a Jester's face with like the little whoop on it. Mm-hmm. Is this the card? Wait, is this the card? It's an artifact. I think it's a 4-cost artifact. Ooh. It might be 3-cost. Shit. I'm gonna go with 4, but I think it's 3. No, it's 3. I think it's 3. 3-cost artifact, and I think this is the card that's like tap 4, or pay 4 and tap it and activate it. And isn't this like you search someone's library and like remove cards from them? So I can't ask you this question, so I'm gonna actually guess. I think it's tap 4, activate, look, or like search target opponent's library for 2 cards and remove them from the game or something like that. That's my guess. And I'm gonna put the flavor text is hee, I'm the jester.
I put it together so well until that.
I'm the jester, quote Kyle, tag C. All right, yeah, give it to me. I'm so sad that I don't actually know what this card does.
Dude, I actually kind of love that it was something you knew, and because like just watching and listening to you try to talk yourself in and out. So
I know I'm like kind of close.
You're pretty close. You were definitely on it. Jester's cap is the art is definitely a Jester's face in Jester's paint. He's wearing the like turtleneck jacket. It's all blue, right? Blue and white, right?
It's blue. Oh, really? There's no orange in it?
There's gold balls. Like so you.
Oh, is that what it is? Okay, yeah.
And it's this is where Kyle got in his own way. It is 4-cost. It is a 4-cost spell. Oh. It is an artifact. You pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice Jester's Cap to look through target player's library and remove any 3 of those cards from the game.
Oh!
That player
I was close.
That library afterwards. Oh no, for
No,
sure.
I was
You
like
were definitely
crazy close.
You were crazy
yeah,
close.
I like basically knew what this card was.
Yeah.
That's the closest we've ever been on
No,
any
for sure.
of these.
And then the flavor text. And it's not he, although we may have to write in to see if we can change it officially or the next copy of this. It is know your foe's strength as well as their weaknesses. Arkham Dagson, Salvadori Machinist.
Mine is way better.
It's so much more jester.
Yeah.
I knew this was a little bit of a risk, but I just remember we were standing there at MagicCon and we were talking about, and to see Seth's face light up when this person was cosplaying this card, they were just so jazzed. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. It's a pretty well-known card. I think that I hope we had people play along with us in the comments and someone like guessed it like perfectly.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm sure.
Like I'm hoping that's the case.
Every now and
I
then.
think this is probably the most well-known card for sure.
That we've brought? Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, some of the ones we bring up were like, this card is so
It was actually new to me.
bad.
So I really enjoyed it. I loved it listening to you know it, but not quite know it.
Yeah, that's funny. All right, thank you so much for that recommendation, and thank you so much, listeners, for staying tuned all the way to the end of our episode. Please direct your attention down below to our description, where you'll find our link tree, as well as links to all the places we host our podcast, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. And take a look in our link tree for our links to our Discord, as well as our Patreon, where you can find additional That's a Good Card content and play games with us on Discord. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode, and we hope to see you next Monday.
See ya. Bye.
Hee hee hee.